the world of Masters of the Universe, Skeletor has a lot of flunkies and sidekicks. And whether they came out in the first wave or waves down the road, there tends to be one flunky that stands above the rest, at least in terms of popularity with fans. And obviously, I'm talking about TrapJaw. TrapJaw just has a lot going on. He tends to be one of those figures that fans, that kids, well, today's fans, just remember growing up with. And he was kind of almost a hero. He was the cool villain. He was the villain that every villain wanted to be. He had so much going on. Interchangeable hands, articulated jaw. I'll hit on all of that in a few minutes in this video, but let's, back up and just talk about TrapJaw on the line. So, when it came time to doing Masters of the Universe Classics, obviously we wanted to get to TrapJaw. He was in every previous line, although in fact it's interesting to note that I think this was only like the third TrapJaw figure ever made at this point. Now, TrapJaw tends to be kind of like the Wolverine of Masters of the Universe. And I don't mean because he's a mutant with healing abilities or sharp claws, but it's just like he's the guy who, sort of teams up with everybody. He shows up, well, I guess I shouldn't say teams up, but he shows up in every toy line now. There's not going to be a Masters of the Universe toy line that really doesn't include TrapJaw. Every form factor, every possible scale, every articulation level, TrapJaw is kind of like a go-to immediate character. And, as I said, it's interesting that in Classics, the Classics character was really the third, or, it depends on whether I guess you count the repaint in the 2000X line. But as far as sculpts, yeah, there was the vintage figure, the 2000X figure, and then Classics. So he was the third time in the history of toys in, 30 years that there was even a TrapJaw toy. Now you could get TrapJaw, in all sorts of form factors. And as I said, like with that Wolverine metaphor, here you are having He-Man teamed up with TrapJaw, or versus TrapJaw, but, TrapJaw sells. You stick TrapJaw in a package, you're gonna sell him. He's really popular. He's one of those characters that shows up in fan art all the time. I mean, I don't know if people see him as an evil dentist or just this amazing hodgepodge of machine and man and torture, but he is the character, the villain that really just stands above all the others. And it would have been awesome to get to him very quickly in the MOTUC Classics line. I mean, personally, I would have loved for him to be, the second, third character in one of those original 2-packs. But as, you can see from the art and from the design, TrapJaw takes a lot of tooling. He does use the human chest, but he needed new arms, new legs, a new robotic arm, new head, new belt, all of those attachments. So he was a lot of tooling. He wasn't a fully tooled figure, but he was almost kind of 80% new tooling, especially when it came to Classics and how much stuff we put in the package, because we actually did him as a twofer. You were able to do Cronus, his alternate identity, as well as TrapJaw, because we included an extra arm and an extra head in the package. He had a lot going on. And it was one of the reasons, like I said, we wanted to get him into Classics as quickly as possible. So when we were setting up the second year, TrapJaw was actually originally going to be the figure that kind of led off the year. He was going to be the January figure, but because of the whole Merman delay, every figure got pushed back a little bit to the point that TrapJaw was now the February figure and not the January figure. It would have been cool. I think that would have been really symbolic. TrapJaw led off the year. So let's start off by talking about his bio a little bit. So, contrary to popular demand, writing the bios, while I enjoyed it, it was a lot of work. And it was much better if there was already a bio in existence and I didn't have to, tie all these loose threads together or fill in the gaps. I enjoyed it, but it was a lot of work. And I was already doing Masters of the Universe Classics, quote unquote, in my spare time from home. My day job was doing the DC line at Mattel, on the books, if you will. That was my job in the official Mattel system. If you look me up, it would say brand manager for DC, not brand manager for Matty Collector. There was no brand manager for Matty Collector officially. So since I was doing a lot of this work, it was such a benefit that TrapJaw had already been developed as Cronus in the 2000X series, and MOTUC Classics was very much a continuation of the 2000X series, picking up a lot of the threads that were left off. And MV Creations did this great comic book, Icons of Evil, where they really fleshed out the definitive origins of several characters. And I think TrapJaw actually had one of the best fleshed out backgrounds where we got to literally learn how he became TrapJaw from being Cronus, where he kind of rebelled against Skeletor and led an army against Snake Mountain because he kind of thought he could do things better. You know, it's kind of like the Starscream of Masters of the Universe. And Skeletor basically beats the crap out of him, burns his skin, and beats off his jaw. So that was literally the origin of TrapJaw. So it was great because I could just write the bio based on the comic and based on 2000X series. The original origin of TrapJaw in the mini comic, he was a intergalactic bounty hunter that came through a dimensional portal that Skeletor created to battle He-Man. And honestly, I figured if we ever did this version of the character, it was just it wasn't going to be TrapJaw. It was going to be an entirely different character. Maybe he'd be called TrapJaw. Like there's a lot of Smiths in the world. Maybe there's a lot of TrapJaws. But the origin, and even the color scheme done for the mini comic version was just completely different from the origin of the 2000X series that was fleshed out in the comic book. Now, they did eventually do this version of TrapJaw in Classics. Super 7 did this for PowerCon. This was one of the cooler figures that they did do, and I thought it was great that they did get to this figure. And this version of TrapJaw shows up in a lot of the licensed toy lines. Super 7 has done it. Funko has done this with a Pop. It tends to actually be an easy repaint if, depending on the form factor. So even with TrapJaw being in different colors and having a very different origin in the mini comic, it's interesting that on the back of his vintage packaging, he still had the revised coloring. So, yeah, that's a whole other story about why the mini comics don't always match. So let's do a little quick deep dive really into what makes him such an amazing character and toy. And I think a lot of that has to do with the play features. There was so much playability about TrapJaw. So first off, he had this little hook on his helmet. And I will absolutely confess right now, I thought I invented this. When I was a kid and I figured out you could put a piece of string through the little loop on his helmet, I thought I was the only one in the world that ever figured this out. Of course, this was in the darn TV spot, so millions of kids obviously saw this, but I don't remember seeing the TV spot. I just remember figuring this out in my playroom, that he could slide down a rope. And I thought that was so cool. I thought I was so creative. And, of course, when I became an adult and saw the TV spot, I was like, oh, I guess I'm not the only one that figured that out. That was deliberate. So just goes to show, though, how playable he is with no sort of tooling, used for the play feature. So his other feature, the jaw and the swappable arm, well, those were direct sort of carry forward from a Big Jim character called Steel or Iron Jaw, I believe, where he had the hook, the interchangeable parts, the articulated jaw, even the face is very, very similar. And I did a whole video about this. You can check out the Big Jim Max Steel MOTU connection for more about that. But you can definitely see where that action feature originated and just kind of got carried forward into the Masters of the Universe world. So when it came time to bringing the vintage figure into Classics, TrapJaw was a character that was going to be fully loaded. We really wanted to do him justice because he is arguably the most popular of Skeletor's sort of band. Skeletor is probably the most popular villain, maybe even Hordak after that, but TrapJaw definitely is light years ahead as far as popularity. And we even, when we did weapons packs as the line grew, we were able to do all of the other arm attachments in his colors. We did this very deliberately. Characters like Hurricane Hordak and Roboto, we wanted to make sure all of the arm attachments were swappable and interchangeable specifically to do exactly this. The idea that we could take the Roboto or the Hurricane Hordak parts, repaint them, and give them to TrapJaw. And his alter ego, Cronus, which you could also assemble from the pack because we had an extra arm, the extra little right shoulder piece, and of course the extra head. It was almost like getting two figures. You could buy two TrapJaws and display him in two very different ways that honestly you really felt like you were getting two completely different figures. And hey, maybe that would even make him sell better. After all, the whole idea was to sell toys, to make money, to unlock more tooling for future years. The better a toy line sold, the more tooling you got. We even did an extra accessory just for Cronus. We actually wanted to do this in the pack, but obviously we couldn't afford it. We already had so much with all the attachments and the extra arm. But it was really great. The weapons packs let us do things like this, where weapons we intended to go with figures could be released later on. Kind of the last thing to touch on about TrapJaw was his legs and his tooling. So TrapJaw's legs infamously got used a lot in the line, and they were fully tooled legs, for him. And they did wind up getting used on a lot of figures. And some of those figures, they got used because that's the legs they had in the vintage line. I mean, we couldn't have done Roboto and given him, Buzz-Off's legs or Skeletor's legs. That wouldn't have worked. He had TrapJaw's legs. But there were, some original characters too, like Sky High, that you never saw his legs, and the Horseman designed him using TrapJaw's legs. But again, Manny Faces, he had TrapJaw's legs in the vintage line. And that meant he was obviously going to have them in this line. And also, again, this is why we couldn't do TrapJaw in year one, because we didn't have the legs available. Once we had the legs, it unlocked all these other characters, like Manny Faces and Roboto. Another good example is, Twistar and Roton using the legs there. For some reason, I don't know, fans tended to really not like this towards the end of the line, saying that we were overusing TrapJaw's legs. And I mean, yeah, we did use them a lot. Even sometimes just the boots got used because they were really cool space boots. And finally, by the time we had characters like Slushhead, where we had other kind of space boots, it was sort of deep into the line and too late to apply that to other figures. But honestly, the human legs got used just as much. I mean, so many characters had the plain human legs that started on He-Man and Skeletor and Man-at-Arms. I don't know. To me, I was like, I don't understand why people are getting so upset over the reuse of TrapJaw's legs. But they're very MOTU. He's very MOTU. He is an amazing character, and I'm glad we did him such justice in Classics, because he deserved it. He is still one of my favorites, I think many people's favorites, and he lives on. Every toy line must have a TrapJaw.